that 2020 and 2021 seems to have been marked by the need to embrace new technology as quickly as possible, and while we're trying to sort things out, we do hit some snags. But why don't you just join me in just spending just a moment, just as the worship music just continues to play in the background. Lord, we just worship you this morning. We acknowledge, Lord, that despite everything, Lord, you are King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Lord, when I'm praying that, I say, despite the big things that have gone on in our lives, despite the small, irksome things like technology that gets in the way, Lord, the least we can do this morning, Lord, is just to lay it all to one side and just come before you. Just in worship and adoration of you. Let's not rush anything, let's just spend a few more moments in worship of God. the evidence of your goodness in our lives. Just worship you and praise you this morning. In your holy and precious name. Amen. Okay, so we're going to get into the word. So again, apologies for disruption this morning and kind of looking some background noises and things like that. But we are continuing to try and sort that out. If we're able to, can we maybe just try and hone in on the word this morning? We're going to continue on that journey through the Beatitudes, and you know what, this one's a bit challenging. I can't help but wonder if there's some disruption there because it's challenging. You know, the word I want to bring this morning, it's provocative, and you know, if I was to be honest, I was probably going to offer a bit of an advisory warning. You know, when you watch a film or you listen to a podcast, sometimes you get that advisory warning that it contains, you know, descriptions that some viewers or listeners may find distressing. Well, that's my advisory warning this morning, that I'm going to give some descriptions that some of you might find distressing, some of us might find distressing, not, you know, graphic or provocative or anything like that, but just things that would cause us to maybe question things, or maybe to consider things differently, or maybe just, I don't know, maybe take a sharp intake of breath, and maybe there's a small amount of offence, perhaps even. Well, I embrace that a little bit this morning, because I think what I want to share this morning should provoke us, and it should convict us a little bit, and it should cause us to think differently. It should cause us to want the best of God, because that's really what it's all about, isn't it? So, you know, we've been doing the Beatitudes over the last number of weeks, and we're on to the final one, the final Beatitude this morning. I've not finished the series yet, I'll conclude it next week, but we've talked about how this is the 8 keys to happiness. And as I've said, this one's a bit controversial. How can I be happy being persecuted? That doesn't seem to make much sense. And it feels like almost things have got a little bit out of hand now, haven't they? You know, why can't we just have 7 keys of happiness? Why can't we just stop at blessed are the peacemakers? I'm all right with that. Let's just finish things there. Not blessed are the persecuted. No, that's not really my cup of tea. Blessed are the peacemakers is a much nicer ending, isn't it? Much happier ending. But let's look at
verse 10 and 12 of Matthew chapter 5. And like I say, this does come with a bit of an advisory warning, but you know, I make no apology for anything that I'm going to say this morning.
You know, when I say it, please remember this. What I'm reading is the word of God. Everything I say is just commentary. You know, if there's something that you don't like, something that you want to investigate more, I encourage you
to study the word, to read the word. Don't just take my word for it. And if there is something that kind of challenges or it creates a bit of friction, then consider the rest of the Beatitudes, work your way back through them, and see if there's something there that needs to be brought into alignment. And more will become clear as we go through. So let's start from verse 10. And it says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me." So I'm not seeing much happiness in there. You know, remember the 7 keys of happiness? Happy are you when people are persecuting you, insulting you, telling lies about you. Oh, I'm not sure about that. "Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." So let's split this down a little bit. Let's consider that word persecuted. What does that word persecuted mean? We probably have a reasonable idea, but the word persecuted comes from the Greek dioko, which is from a shortened word of dio, and it means to pursue and to prosecute. And it means to follow or to press hard after, to literally pursue as one would a fleeing enemy. It means to chase, it means to harass, it means to vex, and it means to pressure. And it was used to describe how somebody would chase down a criminal. So this is that word persecuted. Dioko speaks of an intensity of effort leading to a pursuit with earnestness and a diligence in order to lay hold, oppress, and harass someone. In this case, the blessed. To oppress, harass, and lay hold of the blessed. It doesn't sound very blessed, does it? It doesn't sound very happy. It doesn't sound very cheerful. Let's go back to blessed are the peacemakers. So that's a bit of a glimpse of that word persecuted. But what about this word because of, or this term or phrase because of? Other translations say for the sake of. Now, for the sake of is an adverb which comes from the term heneka, which means on account of. So, blessed are you who were persecuted. So remember that, harassed and vexed and pressed and oppressed for the sake of, or on account of, me, Jesus. You know, it's like David when he was falsely accused and chased after by Saul and tormented and, driven out of the kingdom because of his love for God. Remember, David was described as a man after his own heart, and something in Saul rose up against that. And remember, Daniel was put in the lion's den because of, for the sake of, his overt godliness. That's what we're talking about. It's for being right, and it's for doing right. That's for the sake of. That's on account of. Jesus doesn't say in this scripture it's because of rude or offensive or obnoxious or law-breaking behavior. If he did, we would deserve that kind of persecution. We would deserve that level of persecution. Remember, it's about how criminals are pursued and harassed. But Jesus isn't saying that. The promised blessing doesn't apply to the trouble we might bring on ourselves. It applies only if our righteous lifestyle and our stand for Jesus generates opposition. That feels a bit uncomfortable, doesn't it? There feels like there's a bit of an injustice there, doesn't there? Because if you've done something wrong, you deserve to be pursued. You deserve to be prosecuted, and you possibly deserve to be persecuted. But if you haven't done anything wrong, if the only thing you've done wrong is display righteousness, do you deserve persecution? But Jesus is saying, blessed are you who are persecuted because of me. To put it another way, you might say that persecution is a sign that your life is right in the eyes of God. It's a signal that something's going right, that something's good in you, that you're right with God. It's not just a signal that something to God that you're right with God. It's a signal to the world, because that's where the persecution's going to come from. I found this quote that said, it's difficult to be indifferent to a wide-awake Christian. You can either hate them or love them, but you can't ignore them. Wide-awake Christians confront others with the reality of God. You can't be neutral in such cases. These people must be crowned or crucified because they are either mighty right or mighty wrong. When the world is confronted with our Christianity, they will either embrace it or reject it. They can't be neutral to it. And that's where this reaction comes from. It's a reaction. It's either vastly positive or vastly negative. And remember, righteousness is being right with God. So when it says, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, so it is that being right with God, that people recognize that we are right with God. And we've seen this continuum right from the start of the Beatitudes, right from the start of recognizing that we're poor in spirit, to this point where we're right with God. And all of that journeying and all of that process that's happened from verse 3 up to verse 10 has brought us into that alignment. It's brought us into the space where we're right with God. and it brings a reaction. You know, blended together, the persecuted are those who seek God's will in spite of what others want, who love God so much they're faithful to God when oppressed, and who follow Jesus so unreservedly they suffer for him. Inherent in persecution, then, are both a love of God and a denial of self. And of course, we see the supreme example of this in Jesus, the love of God and denial of himself. And you see countless other people in the Bible who display that. We see John the Baptist, the love of God and the denial of self, and countless other people. But this really is the blessing that nobody wants, isn't it? You know, you can keep that actually. I'll stick with 1 to 7. I'll have those. Yeah, blessed are the meek, I can get on board with that. Blessed are the merciful, who wouldn't like that? Blessed are the peacemakers, absolutely. Blessed are the persecuted, no, you're all right. It's a bit too, I'm not sure. But I find it the most striking of the Beatitudes. And there's 5 reasons why I find it the most striking. The first one is that it's the last. This is the accumulation of the Beatitudes. This is the pinnacle, the end point of the Beatitudes. It's the longest. All of the other Beatitudes that we've talked about are just one verse. Blessed are something because something. This one's the longest. It spans 3 verses. It's the only one associated with a command. It says, rejoice and be glad. That's a command. Rejoice and be glad. It's the only one repeated by Jesus. He says it twice. Blessed are the persecuted in verse 10. And then he says in verse 11, blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. And it's the only one addressed directly to the reader. I don't know if you've read this, if you notice there's a change. In every other beatitude it says, blessed are the poor in spirit, the merciful, the meek, the peacemakers. But if you look at verse 11, he flips it, changes it. Blessed are you when people insult you, people persecute you, people falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. And I think that change is significant. I think that change makes it personal. I think it makes it inescapable. And I think it demands a response. He switches from the third person pronoun, those, to the second person pronoun, you. That's one of the reasons why I think we can't leave it at number 7. We've got to embrace the 8th one because he's speaking directly to us. But isn't this beatitude the reverse of what people would expect? You know, when we go through that journey of the Beatitudes, and I've done this a couple of times, and I make no apology for repeating it because I think it bears repeating. But blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So blessed are those who recognize their inadequacy. Blessed are those who recognize that they're nothing without God. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. So blessed are those who, in recognizing that their sinful nature has prevented them from being in right relationship with God, and God brings comfort. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who show gentleness in spite of their strength. Blessed are those who don't pursue revenge, who allow God to take it on. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. So blessed are those who need more than just the tiny little bits that won't satisfy their hunger, that their hunger and desire will only be satisfied by God. And blessed are those who are merciful, for they will be shown mercy. So blessed are those who don't keep on to forgiveness, don't hold on to forgiveness, who don't refuse to let go. And blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. So blessed are those who've been refined through that process and who've been stripped of all that sin and that negative stuff that would stop them from connecting with God. And then last week, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. So blessed are those who stand in the middle of conflict and bring the light. There's nothing offensive in those verses. There's nothing that people wouldn't get on board with. I can't see anything that anybody would oppose to. So why then, when we get to verse 10, are we being persecuted? Surely everybody would love that. They would love the person who's the peacemaker, who'll stand in the middle of conflict. They would love the person who's merciful, that forgives no matter what. They would love the person who, despite the fact that they could go in and destroy something because of their strength, seeks to go in and bring gentleness instead. Where's this persecution coming from? Who wouldn't love the meek, the merciful, the peacemaker, and the pure in heart? But the world in which we live assumes that it will welcome the Christian with open arms until the first time it meets one. Until then, it's ignorant of its real response to the gospel. It assumes that it's well disposed to Jesus Christ and to God. There's an assumption that they have this, there's an idea of what God is. This wise old man who finds parking spaces for people and who makes sure people don't choke over their dinner because we've said grace. God's so much more than that. God isn't a wise old man who finds car park spaces. I remember reading a quote about this and it said he's an earthquake, And then this kind of idea of Jesus, baby Jesus, meek and mild. Yes, absolutely. But that same baby is the one who turned tables over in a temple and who called Pharisees a brood of vipers. That's when it gets nitty-gritty. That's when it gets tough. And that's when I think the world begins to rub up against it a little bit and reject it. In a lot of cases, pure Christianity is provocative. It demands a response of some kind, one way or another. It's antagonistic. And there are two ways of ending that antagonism. It's either by bringing the world up to Christian character or bringing Christian character down to the world. And we're back to where we were touching on last week with that thermometer and thermostat imagery. The Christianity demands either that the antagonism only ends when we bring Christianity or the world up to Christianity standards or Christianity down to the world standards. We're to bring a reaction. It can't not bring a reaction. Listen to what Jesus says a little bit later on in the Sermon on the Mount, just a couple of verses further down. And it's from verse 14. So this is directly after the Beatitudes. It says, "You are the light of the world." So again, we're in that you. "A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before men, and they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven." We are to be light. But look what happens when we're light. John 3, verse 19 says, "This is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but men love darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that his deeds will be exposed." People loved the darkness, so when the light came, they reacted to it. I remember being a teenager and being at my nan's house and staying there, and Saturday morning came round. I'm still in bed at an unacceptable hour, probably like 7:30 in the morning or something like that. But burst in, big light on. The reaction you can imagine, you've probably all been there when you've been in that really, really dark place and the light comes in. There's an immediate reaction, isn't there? It's almost painful. That's what John's describing here. It's that painful reaction the light brings to the darkness. People loved the darkness and reacted to it. We are the light. People are going to react to us. Our light gets a reaction. Let's consider this a little bit more. 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 12. It says, "In fact, everyone who wants to live a godly life in Christ will be persecuted." I did say this wasn't particularly good news, but Jesus says, blessed, we're blessed. And Timothy says, in fact, everyone who wants to live a godly life in Jesus Christ will be persecuted. We're going to get a reaction. Everyone who lives a godly life. That's righteous, if you remember. That's what it means to be righteous. So there's a connection here with what Jesus is saying. Our righteousness will get a reaction. But let's think about that realistically. Let's think about persecution in the West, in the United Kingdom right now. That persecution doesn't look like us being flogged or stoned or imprisoned for our faith. It doesn't look like being killed for our faith. What does it look like? It's more of a social persecution sometimes, isn't it? It's more, maybe being made a fool of or humiliated or looked down on or disrespected. It's not the same, is it? You can't in this country say that we are persecuted as I described it earlier. But I don't think we're talking about violent oppression here. I think what we're talking about is a silent repression. And I think it's different. And I think it's a lot more subtle, and it's almost a lot more sinister because it's a lot more covert. I think it's about our voice being quietened. I think it's about our prayer being controlled. I think it's about our evangelism being subdued and restrained. I think it's about repression, not so much that oppression. It's not persecution as we might understand it, but it's pressure. It's a pressure to conform. Again, we're back into that thermostat and thermometer territory. It says in Romans 12, verse 2, do not conform to the world, but be transformed to the renewing of your mind. There's a pressure to conform, isn't there? There's a pressure for the church to get in line, to get on the right side of history. I've heard that phrase quite a few times. And I don't buy it. I can't get on board with that phrase, get on the right side of history. But I'm not even entirely sure what that means, because all I want to do is be on the right side of right. And the right side of right is being righteous, being right with God. It's not important to be on the right side of history. It's important to be on the right side, full stop. And I think that's made clear in the Beatitudes. Can I just draw your mind back to last week? If you remember the blessed are the peacemakers, how many of you can remember what the promise was? The promise was, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. And if you remember, I said that being called children of God is that we would resemble God, that we would resemble Jesus, that we would bear his likeness. And I described how my children at various points have a likeness of me in certain, facial expressions or certain things that they say and certain things that they do. They remind us of their parents. And it's no different for us. There's certain things that we say and certain things that we do and a certain way that we look that reminds people of Jesus. And if you remember, Jesus wasn't liked. I've said it all along that the Beatitudes are a continuum. Each one leads on to the next. So if we have that resemblance, that's the bit that people are going to find offensive when we resemble Jesus. Because that's where the reaction comes. As I've said, people look fondly on the stories of Jesus being born in a manger. And we enjoy watching the nativity plays. And we enjoy, hearing about, the healing of the sick, things like that. But people enjoyed less when he was provoking them, when he was speaking directly into their attitudes and their judgmental nature and things like that. Don't forget, a lot of people hated Jesus. A lot of people despised him. And a lot of people killed him. If Jesus got a reaction, stands to reason that we're going to get one. If people didn't like Jesus, some people are not going to like you because you're going to resemble him, because we've been through this beatitude process. You resemble him. Remember, you've got his likeness. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 14 says this. If you are insulted because of the name of Christ, you are blessed because the Spirit of glory and of God rests on you. There it is again. This key to happiness. If you're persecuted because of the name of Christ, you are happy. What? For the Spirit of glory and God rests on you. If you're persecuted because you look like Jesus, you're blessed because of all that's gone on before in the Beatitudes, because you're in that right relationship with Him, because you hunger and thirst after righteousness, because you're weak, meek and merciful and pure of heart and a peacemaker. That's what we've been aiming for these last few weeks. If we're not being criticized for being Christ-like, how Christ-like are we? That's a challenging question this morning, isn't it? If I'm not being criticized or insulted because of my faith, what's wrong with my faith? That's a challenging question this morning. If nobody's criticizing me for being Christ-like, how much do I resemble Him? And if that is a challenging question, can I encourage you to cycle back through the Beatitudes and consider where there's a bit of work needs doing, where something needs to come into alignment, and make the necessary adjustments. And there's an opportunity, within our small groups, within the relationships that we have in church, to walk that through with each other, because that's what being a church of people is about, is journeying that. And if there's something that we can be praying with you for, reach out and get in touch. If there's something we can offer ministry for, then reach out and get in touch. Because I want to be Christ-like. I absolutely, passionately love Jesus. And I want my relationship with Him to be deeper than it was yesterday. And I want it to be deep and deep and deep. Because I want to be more like Him. But the attitude, the outcome of that is this beatitude. The deeper that relationship becomes, the more I resemble Him, and the more I'm going to draw a reaction. And it's not always a negative reaction, because in a lot of cases, and hopefully in most cases, it's going to be, I want what you've got. There's something about the way you are merciful and meek and a peacemaker and pure of heart that I want to be like that. Introduce me to Jesus. That's the reaction that we're after. But there are those that are going to react differently. There is inevitable opposition. Some people are going to hate it. Some people are going to hate you. Faith's like a muscle, isn't it? You have to develop it. And, I'm not speaking from a huge amount of experience, but if you go to the gym, the way that you build muscle is by pulling a muscle in the opposite direction. If you don't move that muscle, and there's that phrase, isn't there, move a muscle, but if you don't move that muscle, nothing changes, it doesn't grow, it doesn't develop, it doesn't become stronger. The muscle has to be pulled in the opposite direction. And it's the same with faith. To develop our faith, it has to be pulled in the opposite direction. And that's often what persecution is doing. I don't think it's any coincidence that the areas of the globe where the greatest amount of that violent oppression that we know persecution to be is where the greatest amount of faith is, because it's being pulled in the opposite direction, and it's developing and it's growing. The strongest are those whose faith is being pulled, and it's about how we live in opposition. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 14 and 15. And there's a bit of encouragement in this, and you're probably thinking about time. But even if you suffer for doing what is right, God will reward you for it. That's good news. So don't worry or be afraid of their threats. Instead, you must worship Christ as Lord of your life. And if someone asks you about your hope as a believer, always be ready to explain it. And there's two words in this scripture that really stand out to me. And I think it stands out because there's a choice. And the two words both begin with W, which is worry and worship. God rewards you for it, so don't worry or be afraid of their threats. Instead, you must worship Christ. Are you going to worry or are you going to worship? We could, wake up tomorrow and think, I'm too worried to adopt it, sorry. I'm too worried to embrace it. I don't want that kind of heat. Can I encourage you to maybe cast that worry aside and worship instead and see what happens? And always be ready to explain it. And at the end of all this, you might be worrying where the blessing is. I wouldn't blame you, to be honest. I said it was going to be a challenge. It was going to be a rough morning. But you might be wondering about that, and I've got a couple of things in summary, and maybe the band could come up and just begin playing as we just draw to a close. So I just want to summarize this morning 3 ways in which I think persecution can bring a blessing, and why this beatitude really is a blessing to us. The first one, persecution is a blessing because righteousness triggers it. You know, persecution is a symptom of righteousness. If you're drawing that kind of heat, it's because you resemble Jesus. It's because those other beatitudes are in alignment. It's because you've journeyed through that process and it's brought a reaction. The second, persecution is a blessing because Christ is seen through it. Again, there's that image of Christ. So you're right with God and you bear the image of Christ. And then the final one, persecution is a blessing because God will reward it. Let me just read verse 10 again and see and listen to what that reward is. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So persecution is a blessing because God will reward it. It says, yours is the kingdom of heaven. More about that next week. Why don't you just join me in praying? Lord, I thank you for your word. Lord, I thank you that it brings encouragement, conviction, rebuke, and inspiration. And Lord, as I've said, everything that I share is just commentary. Everything else is just commentary, Lord. But Lord, I pray that we would be provoked this morning. Lord, be provoked, Lord, to want to bear your image. Lord, be provoked to want to be more Christ-like and to have our faith muscle pulled. As we've journeyed through these Beatitudes, it would be nice to leave it a peacemaker, but you call us to much greater things than that, Lord. So, Lord, I just answer your call this morning. And I pray for my brothers and sisters who are engaged in this service this morning to do the same. And I pray as we do that, we will truly see this concept of happiness and blessing and beatitude. In Jesus' name, amen.
Shall hold to the cross. I shall hold to God alone, for His love has salvaged me, for His love has set me free. For God so loved the world that He gave He gave His only Son. Whosoever believes will not perish, they shall have eternal life. They shall have eternal life. They shall have eternal life.
Thanks so much for joining us this morning. Again, I can only apologise for the technical issues and the disruption to the worship this morning. I'm sure you'll appreciate how challenging it is and how difficult it is, particularly when you don't know what's happening or why it's going wrong. So really appreciate your patience, and hopefully things will be a bit more back to normal, in inverted commas, next week. We're going to be on Zoom just now. If you're watching live, we'll be on to Zoom very, very shortly. Just an opportunity to catch up, just to see how folks are doing, just to have a bit chit-chat. Do join us, details on the website. Much love and God bless.